All right, great. Welcome, everyone. So this is the first meeting of the Nantucket Short-Term Rentals Work Group. And I welcome all of you here. Yeah, so let me start by introducing myself and my colleague Semanish. We are facilitators from the Consensus Building Institute, or CBI. And CBI is a nonprofit organization. We are headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but as you can see, we have offices, or at least staff, scattered all across the country, the hemisphere. We work in a wide array of substantive areas, and we all of the services we provide are as neutral process experts. So our role here is to help to facilitate and chair this meeting. I will be our primary facilitator. Semanish will be supporting and also taking notes. So our objectives today, for today's meeting, we want to meet and get to know the work group members, identify initial outcome goals and criteria for success, understand what the problem is and what it's going to take to fix it, or what fixing it would look like. We are going to then spend some time, we're going to talk about the process and operating protocols for how the work group will work together. We'll talk a little bit about information needs, and then of course prepare for future meetings. So as you can see, our agenda really follows these objectives. We'll start off with some introductions so people can get to know each other a little bit. We will talk about what we want to do here, what our goal is, and what success might look like. We will take a break. We will then jump into talking about the process. And I sent around some draft process protocols this morning, so we will talk about those. We will talk a little bit about what our information needs are, what kind of data we want to be collecting, and how we're going to try and collect it. We'll have time for public comment before we close, and then we will talk about next steps and wrap up in future meetings. Any questions from our panel about our agenda? Okay, so a couple of Zoom norms. Everybody's used to Zoom by now. We've been doing this for quite a while. My request is, at least for primary members, to have your video on. Maybe for alternate members, maybe we can ask you to actually turn your video off. That way, we're going to be able to focus discussions primarily among our primary members. There is a hand raise function, so you should be able to raise your hand to speak. You can also feel free to use the chat. We do ask that you mute while you are not speaking. And just a reminder, the meeting is being recorded, so the recording can then be shared for those who aren't able to be here tonight. And then a note to our attendees. I see we have a number of attendees. We are really going to focus the bulk of our time for the working group, but we do have time on the agenda, as you saw, for public comments. And so we will ask you to hold those comments until then. But there is a Q&A button. So if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. If it's simple to answer them as we go, we will try to do that. But we're not going to interrupt the meeting to answer public questions. We're going to really hold those until the end. Any questions that members of the public raise at that time, we will try to get answered into the meeting summary, or as an appendix to the meeting summary for the future. We're not necessarily going to be able to answer all those questions live, but we'll do our best. Okay. So just some initial ground rules as we get started. I do ask everyone to please be concise when you are speaking, so we really make opportunity for everyone, all the primary members, to speak. To please be respectful. I know that there's some very tempers can run hot on this issue. I know it's something of great importance for a lot of you, but I ask you to treat everybody here with respect, and also any statements you make about any human beings, to do so in a respectful manner. It's fine to have strong feelings about the issues, but I ask everyone to please be respectful if you're speaking about things that the town has done, things that a department has done, anything that's referring to other human beings, to please be thoughtful and respectful and kind. And lastly, to please be constructive. This is really an opportunity. This work group is an opportunity to make progress together. So that's really going to be, the focus is really going to be on being as constructive as we can. I want to make one other note, which is on terminology. I know that part of our task is going to be defining some terms, and we don't all have the same understanding of what terms mean. And sometimes this ends up becoming an argument about the meaning of words. I'd really love us to avoid that. So for now, while we are figuring out our definitions, I will ask that you all just explain, be descriptive about the terms that people may not have the same definition as you. For example, I'll just put out there commercial use. This concept we know is one that seems to be disputed about what do we mean by that. So I'll just ask for now, please just be descriptive in your use of terms that may be contested among other members. And then also to just be respectful in any terminology that you might use as well. Okay, John, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Stacy. I know the protocol suggests that as the at-large alternate, I would be able to participate, I guess, to some extent in the deliberations, but I wasn't sure whether that would include it tonight or not. I can go silent. I'll go invisible. I'll do whatever your wish is.
Yeah, I think for now, John, because I think it's going to be probably a hot topic of discussion when we get to it. So for now, just maybe a slightly lower profile would be good. If there's something you feel you need to say, you can raise your hand, but I think I'll ask all alternates initially to just sort of let the primary reps be front of room.
Sure, I have no problems with that at all.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, moving forward, I wanted to, if you'll indulge me a moment, I thought it might be helpful to start off with just a little bit of an introduction on how this process might be different from your typical municipal work group. On here is the framework that we, CBI, have developed that sort of guide the work that we do on multi-stakeholder consensus building, because ultimately that is what this effort really is. We are bringing together representatives of all the points of view, particularly the divergent and in many cases strongly held points of view that are out there on this issue. And then what we want to do is find an agreement that everybody can live with and sign on to. So this necessarily entails that there's going to be some trade-offs, and there's going to be some compromise, and there's going to be some work involved in really trying to understand where each other are coming from and why. So we're going to take this in a somewhat different approach, maybe than some of your typical work groups might go. Our first step is really trying to develop a shared sense of our purpose, our problem that we are here to solve. And so we're going to spend some time on that tonight, hopefully make some good progress. And then from that, Semanish and I are going to pull together what we think we've heard to bring back to you at the next meeting and try and get everybody to agree on a shared set of problems, or a sort of umbrella of problems that we are here to solve. And that's not necessarily going to be that everybody sees the problem exactly the same way, but that the problem statement sufficiently encompasses everybody's perspective on what the problem might be, such that we're all sort of working on the problem together, right? Then we're going to need to figure out what kind of information we need to solve the problem, right? So what kind of data is necessary and helpful in helping us figure out to what extent these components, these concerns people might have are solvable through the issue of short-term rentals, and how we might do so, right? And then we're going to need to figure out what are some options that are possible for addressing these problems. And we're going to kind of break the problem down into pieces, look at a whole range of different options, be as creative as we can to think about options. And those options are really meant to focus on people's underlying interests, the things you care most about, stepping away from any sort of positions on we must do this or we must do that. And then we're going to ultimately try to bring all those pieces back together and package them up in a way that everybody can live with. And that might mean that there are pieces in that package you really don't like. There are pieces that aren't in the package that you really wish could be there, but ultimately we're all able to agree on trying to find this solution that is at least minimally acceptable to everyone and the interests that you bring to the table. So that's just a little bit about this process. And I hope that's helpful. Okay, so with that, I want to now take some time for introductions. And I want to start with the primary members and ask you to start by saying your name, the sort of seat you're in, and just spend about a minute on what you think it's really important for people to know about you. So why don't I just go through my screen here and start us off with Dave Iverson, and I will stop my sharing so we can look at each other. So David.
Yes, hi. Sorry about that. I lost my screen for a moment there. Hi, Dave Iverson, member of the planning board. I'm here representing the planning board, mostly because I've been kind of taking the lead on this since our chair had some entanglements, so he could not. So that's basically it.
David. Peter Schaefer.
Yeah, hi, I'm Peter Schaefer. I'm the FinCom representative on the committee. Lived on Nantucket for as a summer person for 34 years or 30 years, and then as full-timer for 4 years. My wife and I both live here. I'm also on some few other committees, and the Tom Nevers East Board, as well as the the Senior Center Committee, and the Our Island Home, New Island, Our Island Home Committee.
Great, thanks. Peter Kahn.
Good evening. I'm Peter Kahn. I'm actually coming to you from Burgundy, France at the moment, but I'll be back. I'll be back shortly. Anyhow, I'm a lawyer from a seasonal resident from Washington, D.C. I'm representing as the primary member of the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers. Our position at this point is open. We are simply wanting to be sure that that seasonal residents are treated no differently than full-time residents. Other than that, we're open to all sorts of discussion and understanding here, and we will keep an open mind and look forward to working with everyone.
Great, thanks, Peter. Julia.
Hi, Stacy, and hi, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm the executive director of ACT Now. For those who don't know me, prior to being at ACT Now, I worked for the town in the finance department, and I've been on the finance committee in the past as well. I'm here because we started researching short-term rentals and how they've sort of evolved on the island over the. We've been researching this for the better of 2 years, and glad to see that the conversation is now at a broader community level. And hope to share a lot of good knowledge and ideas, and obviously I think there's no real secret, but our real concern is over the rise of these we'll call it commercial, and I'm sure we'll get into the details of the definitions like Stacy mentioned, but homes that are primarily used as STRs, and really looking forward to chatting with everyone. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Baird. I'm representing Nantucket Together, which is a nonprofit that was founded in the fall of 2020, where our followers are year-round residents, part-time residents, seasonal residents, people who own homes, people who rent their homes, people who run short-term rentals and people who don't, people who are in the business that serve short-term rentals and the tourist industry in general, and visitors. So it's just pretty much a amalgam of the entire island. We're all families and very, very connected to the island, and want to make sure that we can maintain that connection. I've owned my house on the west side of Tom Nevers since 1993 and spent summers there and weekends with my family. I began renting my house, so I do run a short-term rental. In 2015, because corporate America got a little greedy, bought up my company, and the management team was eventually let go, and I wasn't able to retire yet financially, so I began to rent my home. My son is he's a year-round person, works in the hospitality industry, decided after so much time on the island growing up that this was really where he wanted to make his home. So I'm aware he's my property manager. He relies a bit on the income that he gets from our short-term rentals. And so that's to go for his housing. So I'm very well aware also of the affordable housing issue on the island, and very interested in actually defining what the problem is that we all need to solve together, and then moving forward from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Thomas.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tom Dixon. You can call me Tom. I am the affordable housing advocate, as designated by the Housing Stakeholders Group. What would you like to know, my counterparts to know? In my day job, I work for Nantucket Food, Fuel, and Rental Assistance. We run the food pantry and also do including medical travel to that list. My previous job was legislative liaison for State Representative Dylan Fernandez for the Barnstable, Dukes, and Nantucket district. And I look forward to working with you all. I don't have any particular sway or bent in this. I am a year-round Nantucketer, and I rent. So I just look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. All right, I'll turn to our at-large members. John Kitchener.
Yeah. Hi, John Kitchener. My background is fairly typical. I started coming to Nantucket in the very early 80s, renting in the summer until I bought my first house here in 2004. Yeah, for the next 8 years, I kind of split my time between Connecticut and the island. And then in 2012, I became a full-time resident of the island. I obtained my US citizenship in 2020 and became a registered voter on the island. So I'm British by birth, but I moved to the US in 1981. Had a fairly successful career with an American Fortune 500 company. I left there in 2004, and since then I've started 3 fairly successful companies of my own, and finally retired actually last year. I am approaching this with an open mind, not as a representative of any organization or neighborhood, just to get us out of this polarized situation that we find ourselves in. I was, for 3 years, the treasurer of the Monomoy Civic Association, and I recently took the decision to resign from the Monomoy Civic Association board because I don't want any possibility of, real or perceived conflict. So I left the board, and this is where I'm focusing my time. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Jim Sulzer.
Thank you. Boy, tough to follow that great British accent. But well, I'm Jim Sulzer. My wife and I have lived on Back Street year-round since 1982. We were both teachers. I taught for 30 years at the elementary school and at the Nantucket New School. I'm now a writer, writing novels. Just had one about John Keats that came out, speaking of British. I feel like I'm very much a moderate in the middle, looking for common ground. We do have a rental cottage. We rented it for 21 years to the Dennis and Susan Toner, who have since moved to Burgundy, wonderful people. And we decided at that point to do a little more work on it and make it a short-term rental, partly because we wanted it available to our ever-growing family at off times, holidays, and that so on. We have 3 children we raised on Nantucket. I really think there's a lot of common ground we can find between last year's articles 42 and 43. I feel very open-minded about how we do it. I do think we'll have to have really concise and accurate definitions of the various, what different things mean and of the issues. And also, I have been looking at short-term rental regulations in a few places around the country, and I've started to download some of those just so we have some examples. But I know we have to solve this ourselves, and this process sounds great. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jim. And last but not least, Karen. Oh, no, we're still not last. Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Zagaiko, used to being last in the alphabet in other ways. Yeah, Karen Zagaiko is how you pronounce my name. And so I live in Virginia, but I have been coming to the island for some portion of every year of my life since I was an infant. So my grandparents started coming in the 40s and were very active in the community. I don't know if anybody still remembers them, but their names were Marge and Bill Hance. And so, I got to spend summers with my sister and my cousins up here, and we worked and we volunteered all through our lives. And so since we've lost my grandparents now, we've had to be short-term renters as well to maintain the property. I think one of the kind of painful and disheartening things about watching this whole process has been that families seem to get lumped in because we're non-residents as being seen as somehow only concerned about our bottom line or not really caring about the island. And, nothing could be further from the truth. We were just love it, so much that we're trying to save it. So save our connection. So That being said, I have a lot of empathy for people who've had trouble with STRs. My sister lives on island year round for the last 15 years, and she's dealt with affordable housing issues, both professionally trying to find housing for employees and then also for herself personally. So I'm aware of those issues as well. My background is as a clinical psychologist. And so I've spent my career trying to help people communicate and cooperate and understand each other. So hopefully that skill set will be helpful. So I'm just really honored to be a part of this group.
Thanks, Karen. And then we have our Board of Health designee, Mary.
I am Mary Lepre. I am a year-round resident. I work at the elementary school as a school nurse. And I am a nurse practitioner, and I am on the Board of Health, and I am really concerned. I've lived here since I was 5 years old, except for about 9 years that I lived in Seattle, and we live in a covenant house, and I'm really concerned about families being able to own homes with so many commercial companies owning houses. So I really would like that is why I was interested in this, because I think that we do need to make sure that we have nurses and firemen and police officers and all of those people. And if we're attractive for companies to buy houses just to rent out, then we're not allowing people to be able to live here.
Thanks, Mary. And just to remind people, the board, Mary's role is to engage in the discussions, but not be a voting member. All right, so I want to just briefly allow our alternates to introduce themselves, and for you just to say your name and which group you are representing, and then we'll have more time hopefully for alternates at another time. So let's start with Robin. And if you want to just put on your video to just introduce yourself.
Hi there, Robin Nidus, and I'm the alternate to Nantucket Together.
Thanks. Carl?
So Stacy,
Carl's
Carl is
here.
severely under the weather today, so I told him I would cover for him, but I hope he can hopefully introduce himself at a next meeting, if that makes any sense.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you.
William?
Bill Gardner, member from the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers.
Thanks. Joe Kraus? Joe with us? Oh, Joe couldn't make it tonight, I think. Barry?
Hi, good evening, Barry Rector, and I'm the alternate from the Planning Board. And unfortunately, I also have a commitment tonight, so I might beg out a little bit early here, but thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then John Delano.
Hi, I'm John Delano. I'm the at-large alternate.
Great, thank you. All right, everyone. And so then I think the other people that haven't been introduced is we have two staffers from the town, Megan and Adrian. If you want to turn on your cameras and introduce yourself, Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Trudell. I'm here to act as the liaison between the group and the planning department, also to assist with any questions you may have that relate to their local zoning bylaw.
Great, thanks. And Adrian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adrian Rodriguez. I'm part of the administrative team at Plus. I'll be here to assist with administrative duties.
Fantastic. Thank you. And we will probably certainly have questions for Megan and Adrian as we go along, and they're really going to be able to help us figure out also where we can get answers to any questions that they themselves cannot answer for us. Okay. So right now, I would like to turn to a discussion about the problem we are trying to solve and our definition of success. So let me put my screen back up here. All right. So I want us all to imagine that it's a couple of years into the future. I'm setting it a couple of years because I know implementation of whatever it is we come up with might take a little while. So I'm sort of imagining that we are successful here in this group this year in coming up with some new proposals, policies, bylaws, zoning regulations, whatever they might be. And they are approved at town meeting, and then they are implemented. And now we're looking back a few years in the future, and we are looking at, wow, we are patting ourselves on the back. We did a terrific job. We managed to solve all the problems, or at least the contributions that short-term rentals make to these problems, right? And we've been able to really make a lot of progress. So imagine that for a moment. And now what I want you to try to pinpoint is what has changed in the world on the ground, right? I want to make this as tangible as possible. The things that we could accomplish and how they would affect the things you care about, right? Imagine we were really successful and it's been implemented. What has changed? How is Nantucket different now that we have achieved our objectives, right? So I want us to start, just take a couple of minutes. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to just think about your answer to this question. What has changed on the ground, right? And so the answer to this is not there's a policy passed. Well, and then what, right? I want to say, and then what? What did that accomplish, right? Why does this matter? We want to get down to the level of what really matters. Take a couple of minutes to write down your thoughts, and then we're going to do a go round. So take 2 minutes. All right. So I want all of our primary members to get a chance to weigh in during this discussion, but I'm going to let you raise your hand and go in the order that you're comfortable with. So Anyone wants to volunteer? Peter. You have to unmute because I muted you.
Sorry, thank you. Well, which Peter? No, I guess.
Sorry, Peter Schaefer, because you had your hand up
Okay.
first.
Right. Let me just go through my list. It's not very long, but number one would be we're not allowed to anymore to own a property in an LLC without having a name attached to it, whether it be a corporation or whether it be an individual.
So, sorry, Peter, I just want to jump in because I want to get them. What will that do? What will the impact be? Right.
Well, the impact would be that you'd know who your neighbor was.
All right.
Right now, people buy, I live in Tom Nevers East, people buy houses, they rent them and they never come. I've never seen them. I have no idea who owns the house. It's in the name of Butterfly LLC, and that's all I know. I mean, you can do research and find out, but I think it should be more open.
Yeah.
Number two, whatever decision that we make, I hope that we can brag that it's fair and legal. There's many thoughts that have been thrown around that I certainly question whether they would be legal for us to implement them without hurting owners that have financial obligations to banks, et cetera. Number three, we'd have less traffic. And now we can have less traffic without affecting other things. So that can be a separate discussion, but it's a quality of life issue which needs to be addressed. And lastly, and this has really nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it could be a result of it, is we make inroads into the affordable housing problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you say that it might be a result, meaning if we can fix this, then we can move on and fix that.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. John.
Yeah, I just have three. One is around affordable homes, and my hope is that the decline of affordable homes that normal people can buy has stopped. And I don't mean people that qualify necessarily because of income levels. We're at a point where people that make a good living cannot afford to buy a home. So we have to stop that. If people that on the mainland would be considered, making a good living, can buy a home, we have to get back to that. And I just hope when we look at it, this decline that we're seeing of homes that are so expensive that no normal people can buy them has stopped. The second is from a community point of view. I really hope that we will have healed from this very divisive situation that we find ourselves in. And it's not one side is right and one side is wrong. That's not where I'm coming from at all. But I have, in my time on the island, I have never seen a situation that is so adversarial and so polarized. It seems like no one can talk to one another, which is why we're here. But I really hope that, the grass has grown over that and that we're back to the kind of community that most of us, are used to on the island. And, I do hope that having to call the police on parties on the weekend, noise, parking issues with STRs, I hope they've all gone away. I mean, I'm a fairly tolerant person, but I had to call the police, in the middle of the summer because 18 people were having a party and it was 2 o'clock in the morning and it showed no signs of. So I hope that has gone away also, and that sort of calm has come back to our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Thanks, John. David.
Hi. So I think there was lots of good points made before me. I think part of it is if we do our job well, we're gonna not really notice that big of a difference. In all honesty, hopefully we will have regulated problematic short-term rentals off the island. I think what's one of the most important parts for me is that we've protected, and I don't know how we would see this in the future other than to have a vibrant local community or neighborhood. So what I'm saying is that we need to protect some neighborhoods, which tend to be more local neighborhoods, from having short-term rentals make inroads into them, and in short, short-circuiting the community in some sense, and making more affordable housing, because I don't think any housing is affordable here unless it's subsidized, is that we'll protect enough houses in enough neighborhoods to still have a fair amount of locals living there at a more reasonable price. And as well as codifying the use in our zoning at some level to stop lawsuits from happening, I think would be a good thing as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, David. Peter Kahn.
Thank you. I guess my thinking is a couple of points. First, that we find a way to make sure that full-time and seasonal residents are dealt with the same, that it's fair to all. Second, that as someone else said, that we deal with the noise, party and parking issues that seem to be possibly at the root of this concern. That we see no significant increase in our high season population, and that we don't see this affecting our ability to allow for affordable housing. I'm not sure there's a direct correlation in any event, but hopefully whatever we do will not affect that.
Great, thanks, Peter. Tim.
Okay, I just lost my notes here. 1 second. My first point is, in general, a feeling that the culture of the island has survived. And that culture includes things such as families have almost always done short-term rentals, that families can use short-term rentals where appropriate to help sustain themselves, but also the sense of the quality of life is sustained. And I feel, I and many people, I think, feel that if corporations are, and this may be getting more detailed than we want, but I do see a big threat if corporations are able to snatch up properties and turn them into short-term rentals, that there will be just growing problems. And the flip side of that, saying it in a positive way, is I hope that the outcome will be that the stock of year-round housing will increase. That does not mean people won't do short-term rentals where appropriate, but it does mean, I hope, that the stock of year-round rentals can keep increasing and can make it possible for people to live on the island. Now I have one more point, which is fair and legal, as someone said, but also making it so that, I'm going to use this term because I've seen it in one of the places that I downloaded, natural persons. Someone mentioned earlier LLCs, but an LLC, as long as there's a natural person attached to it, I think, yes, that makes sense for short-term rentals, but that natural persons are renting out these people who really live here, who have an identity, not faceless corporations.
Great, thanks, Jim. Julia.
You, Stacy. I guess a lot of people already said really great things, so I may be repeating a little bit, but first would be that what John mentioned earlier, that it become easier for year-round residents to work and live on the island, which we all know and I think agree that is critical to having a really healthy, vibrant year-round community and workforce. Second would be that homes would be used as residences primarily, and we have so few of them, we struggle to figure out the balance, and instead we have a big housing crisis. Yet, we have a healthy supply of homes and total of residential properties on the island. So is there a way to find, a balance with supplying a healthy supply of short-term rentals by having, these people, these real people, like Jim mentioned, seasonal residents, part-time residents, year-round residents, who also use their homes, but can benefit from, offsetting costs, or, being able to afford it to live on the island by renting them, by offering a, the back cottage or whatnot, and still supplying a healthy supply of STRs. There may still be, those sort of these, pure STRs, if you like, in commercial districts, possibly, where the activity may be, related to commercial activity anyways. But this isn't having an impact on the fabric of the neighborhoods, and it's not competing with the availability and the cost of year-round housing. And I think lastly, going back to a few individuals, they've mentioned, this idea of having, living next door to, either an LLC that you don't know who is behind, or, having a real person, but it also boils down to protecting the fabric of the residential neighborhoods. And I think Jim mentioned a sense of the quality of life that's been really an important feature in the culture of the island. And certainly in the last couple years of hearing stories, it seems to be very different for neighbors who live next to a house that is a resident who may short-term rent part of the time than it is for those who live next to a house that is used primarily or exclusively as a short-term rental. These people want neighbors. And I think in residential neighborhoods that should be expected.
Yeah. Thanks, Julia. Karen.
I resonate with a lot of what was said. When I was first thinking about it, what came to mind is just a culture of respect. And by that, I meant everyone who comes to the island to work or to play or to vacation treats the island with respect, but also treats each other with respect, and understands that people come from different perspectives and backgrounds and have to do different things. I really resonated with, having 50 plus years of being in the same place on the island. When I was little, we knew all of our neighbors, we knew everybody on the island. Everybody, who would gather to spend time together, and you would walk down the road and talk to people, and the neighborhood is not like that now. But our property and some of the other properties, and there are only a couple of short-term rentals. It's, seasonal people who come in and have houses, and we don't know them as well. So it's not just a factor of short-term rentals creating that kind of culture, but how do we all form neighborhoods again and get to know each other and respect both workers and people who are renting and people who just come here for the season and don't need to rent, and how does everybody have more of a mutual culture? How do we educate people too who are coming to short-term rentals to be respectful of the island, to be respectful of their neighbors and so forth? So respect was sort of the word on my mind.
Great, thanks. And I'll remind you all, in our scenario here, this has all occurred, so you can describe it all as existing. Kathy.
Right. So I guess what I start off with every time when I think about this is, since we haven't really defined the fact-based metrics that really prove what the cause and effect relationship is between short-term rentals and all those things we no longer want to have, as well as what are the cause and effect relationships between affordable housing and other aspects and institutions on Nantucket, as they each contribute. Because every land bank, or the population growing, or there's lots of different factors in this economy that we have on the island. What is the specific contribution to that problem, to overcrowding, to traffic, to noise, the loss of neighborhoods? It's very hard to answer that question, since we really don't have the data that would give us the answers to that. So I think part of success for me is getting that data so that we can look at it instead of citing anecdotal things, because everybody can do that. What are the real facts and the cause and effect relationship? So then we can then target, okay, if STRs are 25% of this problem, that's one answer versus 2% of the problem, for example. The new regulations that have been just passed by the select board have been set up right now to get rid of the noise issues. And so maybe our focus on success should be on other areas that we need to define as a group. I think outcome wise, and I've heard this throughout, it seems like everybody thinks we would all be good or better neighbors to each other, and that the best parts of the community as we have known it are retained or restored into the future, that we can do the most good with the least harm. In other words, any kind of tweaking to what we do in the short-term rental market is going to hurt somebody. And I just think that the short-term rental market, hopefully everybody will understand when we're through, is a very diverse, no short-term rental owner operates in the same way. And so we have to be careful with what we come up with, because that could really hurt a bunch of people. So I hope we would do the most good with the least harm. And then finally, as a community, I hope we would learn from each other, listen to each other, act and work together respectfully to identify the problems that we can solve on this group, and maybe identify the problems that we can't solve in this group, and acknowledge the interwoven nature of cause and effect. So that's really what I hope our success would be, because then I think we have something to say, hey, this is the data, these are the facts, these are what we agree on, and this is how we're moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Mary.
I would hope that we will be able to maybe take some pieces of things that have already been done. Like Jim was saying, like, this is not a Nantucket problem. This is a problem in a lot of resort communities. And I would love to see something like, I know in certain areas of Hawaii, you have to own a home for 5 years before you can rent it. So I think something like that would be a great thing for us to be able to really make sure that we do know our neighbors, that it's not just some LLC that nobody knows who it is and you don't know who to call. And so I think that's kind of what I would like to see.
Great, thanks. And yeah, you'll notice, part of what I'm trying to do here is separate out a little bit the what and the how, right? The what is, for example, in what Mary just said, the what is the residents know their neighbors and they feel connected. The people who do have homes on the island feel connected to the island and the respect and treatment of all, right? One way might be the mechanism she mentioned. There may be others as well, but I want to, as much as we can, really dig into the what right now, so we can at least have a shared vision of, what success might look like. So, Tom.
Yeah, I agree with many of the points are already said by my fellow work group members here. I just want to kind of make 2 quick points on that are kind of a little bit more macro. I think this work group has an interesting charge, and trust is being put in us to come up with a policy that can go to town meeting. And I think it's incumbent on us that it's not a 150-page chock full regulations where it's trying to solve worldwide inflation or the supply chain or something like this, that folks, members of the Nantucket community, those who go to town meeting, those who read the papers, that we simplify and that people know what's in it. I think that is really important, that Islanders, Nantucketers, and visitors alike can come out of this process and say that work group did a good job on taking the information they had in a short period of time and coming up with a balanced policy. And my second point quickly is that during this process, that residents and stakeholders are heard. And I know we have some time on the agenda here later for public comment, but I'd also like to see, and I'm happy to volunteer this with another work group member or whatever. Obviously there are guardrails with open meeting law and all that, but I'm happy to volunteer some of my own time to take comment or emails or compile however we can, because more folks are going to be hearing about this and reading about it. And I think since we have this condensed time frame, that is as much feedback as we can gather, and then we can all take a look at as we deliberate, the better.
Great, thanks, Tom. And we will talk more about those issues, sort of how the group operates, how do we take feedback, how do we make sure the public's involved as we get into the next portion of the meeting. I want to open it up now for people to respond to what they heard. If there's anything you want to follow up that you heard from one of your fellow members, you know, or other thoughts that you want to share. Peter. First Peter Schaefer, then Peter Kahn.
One thing that we need to remember, we haven't mentioned, and we need to keep in the back of our minds, is the fact that we are going to town meeting, and the people that vote at town meeting are people that live here. Okay, the summer people, as important as they might be, and they are, without them, we wouldn't have them. They're not going to vote, and they shouldn't vote. But I think that, you know, we need to consider that as part of our package, because if we don't, this is a foolish committee.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Well, we can come back to that a little later. Peter Kahn.
Thank you. I want to echo, I guess, what Kathy Baird said. I think it's very important for us to spend some serious time on defining what the problem is. As I listen in any event there, I'm hearing a lot of different things here. I'm hearing a concern about corporations or LLCs or the people we don't know owning rentals properties. I'm hearing noise. I mean, what is the problem? I think we really need to, before you can solve a problem, you really need to know what the problem is that you're addressing. And second, I think it's very important to have data. It's so far, and everything that I've been dealing with, it's such anecdotal data that it's hard to analyze. And I want to work with the town and the other people that you introduced to us earlier, Stacy, to get that data. And I think that's part of the problem of defining what our concerns are, so we can then address what data do we need. This has to be fact driven. If we're going to convince people that we have done a good job, we need to be able to show that we have data to support our position.
Right, thanks, Peter. And yeah, we're going to get into the data question also a little later in the agenda. Julia.
Thank you. I guess I would just two quick things. One, I would echo Peter Schaefer's comment that, you know, there is a difference between the makeup of this work group and the makeup of the voter base and certainly town meeting. You know, from our work, I would say that, and I think most people, you know, would probably agree with this or might agree, that protecting the year-round residents' rights to short-term rent is pretty high on the list. Just because it's so, you know, it's already so difficult and just becoming more and more difficult every year to live on the island and work on the island. And it's certainly one of the, you know, few tools that folks have to be able to afford a home in the first place. So, and I think that personally, I would say it's a reality that that's what we're starting with, is to, you know, protect those rights. And so, you know, I hear what Peter Kahn is saying about, you know, trying to make it the same for everyone, but there is this reality in my mind anyways, to, you know, to protect the year-round residents. The other thing that I sort of forgot to mention that wasn't mentioned by anyone else, so I'll bring it up, is, you know, not for the majority of the use, but, you know, there certainly are, you can see how the average year-round home is 3 people. The average, you know, summer home, I'm not sure, maybe a little bit more than that. The average short-term rental is about 8 people. And so, you know, and you certainly have some that are way more than that, you know, sleeps 27, sleeps 32, sleeps whatever. And so there's this intensity of use that is certainly, or could be, having an impact on in the infrastructure, the local infrastructure, which is something that I think a lot of the residents are concerned about is, the rate at which we're needing to build out the infrastructure, or the use that's being done out there.
Thanks, Julia. John.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. I don't want to jump to the hows obviously yet, but what I would ask that we all start to think about is, a couple of people have said, well, we've had anecdotal, comments and stuff, and that's correct. It's correct. I think Kathy said that. I think Peter may have mentioned that. It is correct. But, I'm a big believer in surveys of the people that are impacted by the decisions we're going to make, so that, because there's some very quantitative data, but if we could figure out what it is we want to know, I think we would be well served by trying to survey, part of our year-round base and part of our seasonal base so that we have some better feeling for what people really think, and not what just, the nine of us think. So, I know it's time consuming. I know it can be difficult, but it can be done. It can. And, I've been involved with one fairly recently. So just something I hope we could replace anecdotal comments with some surveys, which for me on the island are much better than, when we talk about public hearings. But public hearings are difficult because most of the people we're talking about have day jobs, and perhaps more than one day job. And so I don't personally think that we're going to get too much from public hearings. We'll get something, but I would love to see a broader base, get a survey and give them the time to send it back.
So I'm gonna hold that thought. People are already now moving into data, and then how we get the data. I want to slow you down, and David, if you don't mind, I'm going to just jump in here for 1 second still on success. And I want to put up what I think I have heard from you all, both today, just now, and also in my initial conversations with you, to see if I am getting this, right, of what success might look like. So we heard that preserving Nantucket's character and traditions, that includes the traditions of having short-term rentals, and both for year-rounders and part-timers who use those in order to afford their properties, but also really preserving neighborhoods, a sense of community and quality of life. We heard that people want residents to know their neighbors, and to be able to, that everybody's being treated with respect. We heard that there's some moving past this issue and the rifts and the tensions and the negative tensions that are happening on the island. We've been able to move past those. There's there's clarity of a pathway forward, right? Whatever it is we come up with, it's clear, it's simple enough. It's supported by the community, and particularly, of course, by the year-rounders who have to vote for it. We heard about avoiding economic harm to residents, year-rounders, that was echoed here, but also part-timers, as well as local businesses and the town's tax base. That came up maybe more in my conversations. And then we have the suite of quality of life issues and cost issues that people have raised as concerns, but have also raised, we don't know the extent to which short-term rentals are directly or indirectly or at all connected with these issues, but we all agree that these are issues, right? And so at least for now, until we have more data on how it's connected to short-term rentals or not, we could at least say that success would be minimizing or reversing any contributions that short-term rentals might make to this set of problems. The availability of year-round residential, rental and worker housing, the availability of affordable housing, the escalation of property and rental costs for everyday people, as we heard, issues around traffic congestion, overcrowding, taxing of infrastructure and enforcement, and challenges around noise and nuisance and quality of life for people who live or vacation in residential neighborhoods. We also heard a discouraging or preventing of purchasing of homes purely so that they could become short-term rentals. This is an area where, you know, if this is happening, and the extent to which it's happening, its connection, at least I've heard from people, to the problems we see above of availability of housing seems clear. And here I'm just being clear, saying off-island corporate investors or absentee landlords, people who are using these properties solely for the purpose of short-term rentals. And then we also heard provide legal protection for acceptable short-term rentals in zoning and town bylaws. Let's stop lawsuits from happening. Let's make sure everything we come up with together is legal. And then we heard about fair and equitable treatment between full and part-time residents. Now, not everybody necessarily agrees with all of these, and certainly the prioritization that people might put on these may differ. But this seemed to me, I think, the best summary I could come up with so far of what we are, what success might look like, right? Given uncertainties about data, et cetera, so far. But any reactions to this? Julia.
I guess I would say this looks like a fairly comprehensive list of what I think I heard. But you made a good point, which is it's sort of a bucket of all of the different things. And so is there a way to, you know, when we share, let's say, this list, or when we, is there a way to sort of mark this as, you know, this is like a big bucket, and to your point, it's not necessarily like an agreed upon list. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'd like to do, as I said, the problem as we're going to define it may include things that are less important to you and maybe important to other people. I think the thing we're going to want to try and do is identify places where you actually can't live with, like you really don't want something on this list to happen.
Okay, well, if I may then,
Yeah.
Sort of what I was referring to at the end of on my second time around, the final point that we are going to treat everyone the same. The reality is that may not be practical, and it may, for example, ACT now is absolutely supportive of help, making sure that seasonal folks can find a sensible way of short-term renting their homes, and that they find a solution that works for them. But like I mentioned, the year-rounders are really going to need to be protected here. And I think we have many examples, and I understand some people may have reservations about how you do that legally and all sorts of things, but practically speaking, I find this one very difficult to give the flexibility needed for the community to find a way to live with short-term rentals over time.
Yeah, understood. And I guess one thing I would say is, and I realized that this one was potentially the most contested on my list. And I guess we might be able to say, if we're able to do all the other things on the list while also providing fair and equal treatment, would that be acceptable? I know you're saying you're not sure there is a way, But, right, one of the ways of thinking about this is like, yeah, you're not as concerned about achieving that as an objective. However, if we were to accomplish all the other bullets on the screen while and still providing fair and equal treatment, would that be acceptable? Or is it as in and of itself not acceptable?
Right, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with what your explanation, which is we could strive to do it. Whether we can practically get there or not is a different story.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just mention the word purely before on the third to the bottom bullet, discouraging or preventing purchase of homes purely for STRs. I certainly agree with that. But I would say that, sometimes if it's a primary use, or if it's primarily or purely, it's almost exclusively. So again, we haven't talked about definitions, so it's a little bit hard to have this conversation maybe.
Yeah. But I think your point being whatever definitions we use, your interest goes beyond purely there. You would like to see actually, maybe you would like to see the discourage or prevention of home purchases like primarily
Or purely, those would be the right.
So yeah, fair enough. Thanks for naming that. Peter Schaefer. Peter Schaefer, you're muted.
I'm
There
sorry.
you go.
We're defining success, but we haven't defined what the problem is. So I'm a little confused what we're doing. Number one, let me finish. And then number two is, we're not talking, I have no idea what time period. Are we talking about going back and changing the rules for people that already have done things or live here? Are we thinking about doing it currently? Are we thinking about making these future plans and making regulations that are to the ongoing community? I just don't understand how we can define success until we answer some of those questions.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in on that, I think I am using this defining of success as a tool for really trying to name what the problem is from the perspective of all of the participants, right? That is, the problem is the thing that these things would solve, right? And again, we don't necessarily agree on the extent to which each and every one of these represents a problem that needs a solution. And we don't necessarily all agree on the contribution of short-term rentals to whatever component this might be of a problem, right? But I'm trying to back into this a little bit to see if we can find some shared ground around this is the world we would actually love to live in the future. If we had this, we'd be good, right? And I wanted to sort of start there and then see if from there we could go then backwards into, okay, given this, what can this group do to help us move toward this future that we all can live with?
Except, am I still?
Yeah.
Except on Nantucket, you have to understand, if we come out with this and the newspaper publishes this list, they're going to think this is what we're endorsing. We have to be just very careful on what we put on paper and make sure that it is what we're endorsing rather than just our thoughts. And I think we have to be careful. That's all.
Okay. I'll be very clear that this is a group brainstorm and nothing more.
Thank you.
Thanks. Peter Kahn.
Yes, I guess I don't want to rain on the parade at all, but I am concerned that we ought to be having town council involved at the outset here. I mean, we can be wasting our time very quickly here if what we're talking about is not legal. Okay, and so when we're talking about or people are raising the issue of, well, we want to treat certain people differently than other people, that immediately raises concerns of constitutionality. There are cases out there where this has been dealt with. It's murky. I'm the first as a lawyer to admit to that, but that's why I think town council needs to be involved, because we can have a wish list here, but if it's not legal, we're wasting our time. I also agree with Peter Schaefer, and as I said earlier, I mean, we really need to, I think, move quickly to defining the problem. That that is the guts and the heart of this. Once it seems to me anyway that everything sort of flows from that. We've got to come to some understanding amongst ourselves of what the problem is, and then we can start addressing the solutions. But just sort of coming up with a wish list without understanding the problem, it seems to me sort of a backwards way of going at it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Peter. Jim?
Yeah, I want to go back to fair and equal treatment for full and part-time residents, because I think that's a little different from the tone of the other items on there. And certainly respecting Peter Kahn's idea, that was his idea, that year-round and seasonal people should be treated equally. That is a position, it is a position worthy of respect. However, in this case, I think we should maybe use a word like equitable rather than equal, because equal is already a conclusion that our success will be defined by treating seasonal residents exactly the same as year-round. Now, maybe we will. I don't know that for a fact that we won't. And we, as we all think about these things and change our minds and understand it better, we may decide that equal is exactly what we want. But I don't think we should list a conclusion as one of our defining successes when we don't know if that's going to be our conclusion. A word like equitable is a word like fair that says that we will come to a solution. That may mean treating people equally. It may mean, if we can do it legally and if we come to that consensus, having some nuance in the answer for year-round versus seasonal. I don't know the answer. I want to respect seasonal people. I love a lot of seasonal people. They're very important to our community. But I think the word equal is a big mistake. I think it should be equitable.
I hear you. Yeah, thanks. David?
Hi, I don't want to be the one to rain on the parade, but it's really difficult to have this discussion, at least for me, until we all agree as a group on definitions and data. Because none of this really matters until, like someone said earlier, Peter, I think said it, is that we need to know what the problem is. And until we can all agree on the data and the definitions, I think it's really difficult. Listen, I think it's great that we're all looking at this and we're giving our best outcome here, but it's really difficult to judge that without really knowing the problem and having the data and then agreeing on the terms or that we use or the definitions.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. We're coming to that soon. Mary?
I agree with what Jim just said, because I think that equitable is a better term, because there are a lot of differences. I mean, the tax rate is different. We have residential exemption, we have excursion rates. There are things that people who live here year round have that people who have seasonal homes maybe don't get to take advantage of. So I agree that equitable is a better word.
All right, great. Okay, well, I think that was really helpful, and I know it's a little frustrating for some of you that I wanted to start here. And I think the reason is that I did really want to try and find some common ground and name it, right? Put it out there that, like, the vision of the world that we are hoping for is not necessarily that far apart. That there's a lot of commonalities in what people really want to see happen in the future on Nantucket, the goals that you actually want to accomplish. And yes, they're not all shared. And yes, we don't agree on, how to get there for sure. And we're going to get there. I just wanted us to start by really trying to have some positive shared vision of where we could go together, right? What we could accomplish potentially, that would leave everybody feeling like we've done good, right? So I will leave it at that for now, and we will come back to this issue at our next meeting. I want to jump into talking about our operating protocols. We were scheduled to take a break around 5:30. We're a little ahead. Why don't we take that break now anyway, and take a little extra time because it's a long night of meeting. So I'm going to suggest that we all take a break and come back together at 5:45. So we'll have a little over 20-minute break here. So if you want to turn off your video, feel free, grab a bite, grab a snack, use the facilities, go outside, and come on back at 5:45. Thanks. On what? Oh, thank you, Semanish.
Sorry about that, Stacy. Totally forgot.
I forgot as well. So for those of you tuning in to the recording, I am walking through the draft operating protocols that we will be about to be discussing. So the member expectations, you'll see that it's a combination of the things in the framework, such as the attendance at meetings, as well as some probably obvious suggestions about how to operate in good faith and commit to decency and respectful behavior, speak one at a time, stay on track, strive to be constructive and have an open mind, try to find solutions that address not only your own concerns, but those of others in the group. And to really focus efforts in this group so that this is really where we are trying to find solutions, at least during the time that this group is in progress. And also some requests around how we communicate with the media, not attributing comments to any others, don't speak on behalf of the group as a whole, or on behalf of any other individual members, and to really work constructively to make sure that we are making progress. Then we have a section on decision-making. The decision-making section suggests it includes the town's framework that consensus is 7 votes out of 9 on any topics brought to a vote, but it also notes that our goal is to try to reach unanimous concurrence of primary members if we can. So we want to seek concurrence of all members, but if we are unable to reach that, the framework defines consensus as 7 out of 9. We then have a section about how the meetings themselves will take place in accordance with open meeting law. They will all be open to the public. There will be public comment. They will occur primarily using Zoom webinar, though we will see if we can try and find a time to come together. And again, this is, I think, a place where I heard very different perspectives when I spoke to you all prior to the meeting. Some people said really important to try to be in person and hold the meeting hybrid for those who can't be in person, and others who said, you know, I think having that hybrid really puts those who are remote at a disadvantage, and it makes finding resolution much more difficult. I did propose here that we stick with remote virtual meetings most of the time, and this was also based on my conversations with the town about the availability of remote spaces that would be acceptable, or hybrid spaces, in-person meeting rooms that would be acceptable for hybrid meetings. You really need the right technology and setup. So we would need to have the available meeting space to make that possible. And it was my understanding in my conversations with the town that that would make it much more difficult for us to organize our meetings in a timely fashion for the kind of things that we're going to be needing to do, meeting on a very regular basis. So that was another reason for suggesting that. So then, yeah, a couple other things about being able to communicate between meetings as long as we are complying with open meeting law, and trying to share meeting materials in advance, knowing that we have a very quick turnaround between meetings if we really want to meet every other week. So we're just going to have to do the best we can on that. We have a section that describes facilitation and my role and Samanish's role as facilitators, that we are neutral, that we work equally for all parties for the benefit of the town as a whole, that we are responsible for ensuring the process runs smoothly, developing agendas, distributing draft and final summaries, helping to generate draft agreements, and that we it has our ethical statement that we have no stake in the outcomes, no decision-making authority, cannot impose any solution, and that we must maintain impartiality toward all parties. And also noting that we are available to consult confidentially with participants during, primarily not during, since we're here on Zoom, though if people chat to us, we are able to respond, and certainly between meetings as well. And lastly, we had a section on public engagement and outreach. So to the point that was raised earlier about how we would be involving the public, we wanted to propose that maybe we would want to hold some public meetings that were really gave the public a chance to weigh in more than they are at these meetings. And then we offered an initial work plan and schedule for everybody to consider. So I'll stop there for now and open this up. And Mary, our apologies that you were left off. I think that was utterly an error on our part. So we apologize for that. I want to stop there and open it up. Peter, I'm going to call Peter our first to the hand raise today. Peter Schaefer, jump right in.
Just a quick wish, if we can get a list of all the members and the alternates with their phone numbers and their email addresses, that'd be great.
Yeah, the list is on the website. And I think, I don't know, do you typically, can we put links to people's emails from there? I guess we'll go around and confirm that everybody is comfortable having your email linked to that, and that would be a good way for you all to get that. John.
Yeah, so I'm going to admit to not being that experienced with open meeting laws, so I'll probably defer to Mr. Iverson with my next question, which is, I'm used to working in business environments where, for example, we now have a task to define the problem. And I think most of us are seeing that as probably, if not job one, close to job one. I wouldn't normally wait 2 weeks to have another conversation. I would normally say, okay, you, and you work on this, talk to everybody, get a straw man and have it up ready for the group to talk about in 2 weeks' time. And you need to talk to everybody. But so what I'm struggling with, is it okay? Let's just say everybody agreed that we should do that we should have a small group work on the defining the problem, getting a straw man up. Is that okay? Is that legal or not with open meeting laws? David, I don't know.
Yeah. So Megan just dropped a link in the chat about open meeting law. I will let her jump in to answer your question directly. But what I will say is that I know is legal is that I, as the facilitator, Semanish and I, as the facilitators, we can talk to everyone. We can pull together, a working draft or to put forward at the next meeting. And in fact, that is kind of part of our role. But I'll let Megan answer your question about whether a small group would be able to do that, what the constraints and limitations are of that. Megan?
Okay, thank you.
My recommendation would be if the work group is going to appoint a subgroup, that would be subject to open meeting law in terms of posting, having it available to members of the public, whether it be in person via Zoom. If you're having a casual conversation with other members of the work group because you run into them in the Stop and Shop, that's something that's entirely different, where you'd need to keep those conversations less than a quorum. But if it's a prearranged group to help facilitate objectives that are a part of the larger scope and task of this work group, yes, I do think that would be subject to open meeting law.
Yeah, so typically I've heard it's like a subsection of the group cannot deliberate outside of work group meetings or outside of posted sub work group meetings, right? So you could have a work group or a subgroup within our work group that met to work on stuff, but they would have to also post their meeting and have it be open to the public.
Yeah. So then, Stacy, I guess my question is, we need to work on this defining the problem.
Yeah.
And we can't wait 2 weeks for that. So you're gonna somehow.
Yeah, my hope
take the lead.
is that we can bring something back to you all about this at the next meeting based on what we've heard from each of you about what the problem is and what we need to be solving. So yes, that is something that we can do.
So, sorry, just to follow up, are you allowed to, so let's say you do round one of that in 4 days, are you allowed to then send that to us all and say, okay, react, give us feedback so we can have maybe another round of before we get to the meeting on whatever the date is?
Yeah, again, I'm going to sort of refer to the town. Different towns sort of have different rules about that. I have in the past been told that it's fine for me to collect everybody's input and to synthesize it, individual input, and to synthesize it and to put it forward to everyone, as long as I am putting that forward to the public as well. But to do multiple rounds of that between meetings has been named to me as potentially a violation of open meeting law.
I would agree with that, Stacy.
David.
Yeah, and this is just back to John's, as frustrating as it is, John, this could be one of the reasons why town government moves at such a slow pace. But we also need to be careful of emails. We can't be sending out emails to a large portion. We can't reply all. If you want to send a single email to a single member, that's not a problem. But when you start chaining that email or replying to all, that could be a violation. So again, that's part of the challenge of town government, is working within these constrained places.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Kathy.
All right. So John, I agree. I brought that point up in my little opening remarks about the needing the problem solved. But then I'm wondering, okay, how do we solve the problem or come up with the problem that we want to define is the problem without the data that we're needing? So it's like a chicken and egg thing. I think we need that.
Yeah.
So that's.
Yeah. I guess we'll find a way, Kathy. Not going to be easy though. Okay.
Yeah. And it is why it's not as simple as let's define the problem and then let's solve it, right? I think it is why I tried to start with what's the world we're hoping to create. And then we have to sort of, I think, back into, which of these is connected to short-term rentals, right? And then, as Kathy said, then we get into like, well, what evidence do we have that these things are connected to short-term rentals? So, Kathy, did you have something else, or your hand's just still up? Okay, Peter Kahn.
Yes, I must tell you, I'm ready to start talking. I mean, I think the only way we're going to solve this problem is to start talking about it. And I agree that we needed, and I've said this before, we need to define the problem. And I want to hear what my fellow members have to say. I think we're all going to be better understanding where we're each coming from, and then we'll slowly begin to filter this. And of course, as Kathy says, we need data, but let's talk about what the problem is and then sort of determine what data we need to answer the questions that are raised. But, it's time to talk. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I hear you. And I just wanted to spend a little time on these protocols because it is my experience. I know there are process people, and some of you are process people and some of you are not process people. Some of you are like, oh, process. But it has been my experience that it is really helpful to just be clear altogether of sort of what are the ground rules that we're operating under in advance, so that we have these commitments, so that we know what we are all committing to, so that then, our chances of being successful in our deliberations with each other are much higher. So I just want to take a little bit of time, and maybe we don't need the amount that's on the agenda to talk about these ground rules, but I do want to hear if anybody has any questions or concerns about the ground rules, so that we can actually, sign off on them together as a group, and then we can move on. Julie.
Sure. So I guess just a couple of minor things, and then one concern that we had when I, shared this with the rest of our organization. But one concern is that, the packet that we're looking at is not something that the public received. We received it this morning, and I would hope, I know it happens sometimes, and I know it, sometimes it has to happen, but I really would hope that we would post the packets for folks to see ahead of time in the future, just like the select board does, or the planning board, or that would be.
I 100% agree with you, and I apologize that.
No, there's no apology needed, but
get posted in advance. Yeah.
And then, I think a lot of this is really great stuff in terms of the, the member expectations and the reality of, what we're facing with, when we talk about open meeting law and striving towards transparency and community engagement. But when I sort of go through this, I get to page 3, And for those of us who can see this document in the last 2 points in H and I, and in overall, what this talks about is sort of refraining any efforts to, it sort of limits how we can share with the public in a way. And so, I think we're all here because we care and because we want to see a solution, but we have different point of views and we all need to respect those. But we have to remember that we're a public work group, and just like any other board or commission, and that, open meeting law is focused on transparency and public engagement, like I mentioned. And I don't think that restricting the work group members to how they can share with the public would be sort of in the spirit and in actually, with the intention of open meeting law. And in fact, I think it kind of goes against what that even the voters, some of the concerns that the voters mentioned at town meeting, saying that, what is a work group going to come back and what are they going to do? And so, we're going to have to be extra cautious and share as much as we can. And I think when the public sees this document, maybe, they might rightly have some concerns. And honestly, I certainly do. So I'm sort of not comfortable with a public town board trying to impose limitations on transparency and full community engagement. And, part of our responsibility is to communicate back to our constituents about what's happening with these long meetings. I don't think that most people are, who I talk to anyways, we're going to be on a 4-hour meeting this evening. And so they want to know what happened and they want to know our opinions on the issues. And so I think, we all owe it to the community to be fully engaged and to get the input that we're seeking. And so, that was the concern that I wanted to raise from some of these suggestions.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And so I put up the ones that you were, H and I, that you were speaking of, so those who are watching can see what we're talking about. And to be clear, I think the idea of H is that the efforts to solve the problem are happening here in the working group rather than outside by members of the group trying to do things separate from the working group. The I is not meant to limit any representative's ability to participate or to communicate their own ideas to their constituents. In fact, that's also built in as one of your member expectations to just go up here, right, is that we expect that people will share back with their constituencies. But that what this one is that you will not say so-and-so said this, and the group as a whole said this, right? We will be creating summaries of the meetings that are, they don't look like your normal meeting minutes, I promise, right? Where it's going to be a transcript and word for word what people said. The meeting summaries that we create will be meant to make sure people really know the nature of what was going on in the meeting, but they will not be for attribution. That is, they will not say Peter said this and David said this, right? And the reason for that is we're deliberately actually trying to separate the people from the problem and say instead, here's the concerns people raised about this issue. And it'll list the concerns, right? So the idea here is not to say you cannot tell people what went on in the meeting. It is to just avoid people putting words in each other's mouths, accusing or saying what other people said or did, really just asking you to speak for yourself. So it should not, Julia, I think, limit your ability to communicate with your constituents about what your understanding and perceptions are and feelings about things. But it does avoid competing narratives about what actually happened at a meeting, and hopefully tries to tone down the rhetoric and the animosity, and prevent things from being more contentious than they need to be. Peter?
Yeah, I understand what Julia's saying, and I don't have a problem with what she said. However, on RH, there shouldn't be anybody here working with or developing a warrant, an article for the warrant, because that's what we're doing as a group. So it shouldn't be being done as an individual.
Yeah. Any other comments or thoughts about any parts of these operating protocols? Peter?
Yeah, I think the way I view it is, obviously you have a right and should be reports, concisely and accurately to your constituency, but you shouldn't be campaigning publicly for a position. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Stacey. We need to tone this down. We've been asked to come together to talk rationally and responsibly about these issues, and it does not help to raise the temperature or continue to raise the temperature. And the temperature is raised when you go out publicly to try to campaign for a position. That's not, we're beyond that now. And I think we all need to commit to the idea that we're not going to do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. John?
Well, just Stacey, can we just hear from everybody that they do agree with the, item H, which says, no one's going to be submitting or promoting articles regarding SDRs while this work group is in progress. You said it, but does everybody agree to that?
Yeah, I think this discussion these are in draft, and this discussion is to hear from people. But ultimately, yes, I would like us to come up with a set of protocols that we have explicit buy-in from everyone on the group to adhere to. Julia?
So I guess I would say that I appreciate your clarification on to me, the first part is sort of odd. The second part where we mentioned that we would not represent the whole group, I totally appreciate that. That seems like proper protocol. The first part's a little odd because it's sort of, these are public meetings, people say things, they're forever in the public. And so to say that we can't use them to repeat them or put them in a text, or to me, that's counter OML. And maybe in the private sector that would absolutely fly. But I think that's that's not the way any other work group in the town or commission or board has ever functioned. And that's very, I think that's concerning. On H, I think that, so we are all here hoping that we find an outcome, but there is no guaranteed outcome. And there's no guaranteed it's not guaranteed that the voters will like the outcome. And so, quite frankly, I'll say we're not sure that, there's not another article needed sort of as a, what if this work group can't get anywhere that the voters can support? And, I've certainly heard concerns from individuals in the community who themselves are interested in, maybe bringing something. So I can't help them at all. I think it's just restricting. I understand the spirit of it, but I think it's restricting, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think it's required, because at this point we can't appreciate whether we would support, right, an outcome. It's sort of saying, in a way, it's saying, please agree to something we don't agree on yet. We haven't developed actually. And so I think it's very difficult.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
I hear what Julia's saying. However, it's counter to the purpose of the group. If you're endorsing or working on an article that's contrary to what we're working on in the group, even if we end up coming up with nothing. It's just, I think that's the purpose of the group, is to work as a group. And if it's a big zero, it's a big zero. And then we say, okay, everybody do their own thing. But I think it's really sends a bad story to the rest of the town if the group is making a decision on their own outside of our big group or our working group.
Yeah, thanks. Peter Kahn. Peter Kahn, are you still with us? Oh, there you are. You had your hand up, so okay. We can't hear you, Peter. I think you're there. You
Okay,
go.
sorry. Were you speaking to me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. I'm sorry. I lost connection here. Look, this is a good faith, there's got to be a lot of good faith here if this is going to work. And I thought we had all committed to come into this, and boy, everybody on their sort of statement was talking about how they're they enter this with good faith, and they're all everybody's prepared to be compromise on positions. For people to take hardline positions early on and say that they're going to go ahead and put forward warrant proposals I agree with Peter, is just counterproductive at this point. Either we're going to go into this with an open mind and an attempt to resolve this, and let's talk about the problem and let's work through it, and not and not start talking about how we're going to start pushing our own positions. And publicly drum up support for our positions. That is not what we're here for at this point. We can report back to our constituencies on where things stand, but even talking about what positions certain people take, if it's in the context of trying to point out that they're sort of the quote unquote enemy or they're against us or something like that, that's just not productive. So I really think that we need to be either we're going to come into this with a good faith attempt to reach consensus, or we're going to come at this just holding our own positions. And if that's the case, then I hate to say it, but it's probably a waste of time.
Thanks, Peter. David.
Yes, I just wanted to voice. I mean, I think both Peters have said it well. I think that it really is. It would be disingenuous and would really do great harm for any group or individual to have a little side hustle going on here to put in their own warrant article at the next town meeting. I think that we all need to agree in blood that that will not happen, because it would be a insane waste of all of our times to be here putting our effort and time into this, to have some group or organization or individual blow this up. I had one that I wanted to put in that was a little different than this, but it had to do with STRs. So I can't do it. And I happily won't do it, because I think what we're working on here is far more important. And I think that we as a group need to come to that understanding. As far as I goes, listen, I think there's many opportunities for constituents, for people interested in following this, either watch it on YouTube, because it will be posted on YouTube, and then they can listen and watch and make their own decisions instead of one of us telling them what our opinion of what happened was. I think we need to let the public draw their own conclusions, and whether it be by minutes or by watching it on YouTube or by logging on during the meeting. I think that spoon feeding the public our opinion of what took place in a meeting is not what we need to be doing here. The part of the reason we're here is because everyone has a different fact and everyone has a different definition. And if we don't abide by these rules, we're going to continue that cycle, and it's not going to be productive, and we're not going to come out of this after we have spent a lot of time and energy with a productive outcome. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Julia?
I guess I'd like to hear what John and Kathy have to say. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
John?
Well, I absolutely agree with the two Peters and with David, and I'm going to personalize it. You know, I have been a member of the Monomoy Civic Association for 3 years, and I really don't think there would have been any conflict between me staying on that board and you know, working on the work group the way I want to. But I thought about it, and I thought, you know, to my teammates on the group, I don't want anybody even thinking that, well, he said he was not representing anybody, but he is a member of the MCA board. So is that really true? And, you know, it was a difficult decision for me to tell my fellow board members that I'm sorry, this is bigger than Monomoy and I'm leaving the board. So with that said, I find it really difficult if any member of the group is kind of got a plan B in their back pocket in case this doesn't work. Because I, for one, have put all my marbles on this game. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks. Kathy?
I just want to say that Nantucket Together will sign up for HNI and do our little blood test. I'm right here, ready to go. I think that's the rules that we need to play by. I know that there are public meeting laws that say there's a right for us perhaps to use this information and because it is already public, but I think that we are a team, we are a group, we need to act that way, we need to act together and move forward with whatever we come up with and support it, all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Did you want to jump in, Julia? Or you want to hear from others?
Oh, I'd love to hear from others. Thank you.
Okay, Jim?
I agree with what recent people have said. We're trying to float a balloon together. It's not an easy task. We've all got to be on board. If it doesn't work, there will be another year to do another article, but let's put all, I'm going to mix my metaphors. Let's put all our marbles in the balloon, but we've got to go all in on this and with the very best in us of respect, consideration, open-mindedness, like we've been saying. This is not the year to be thinking about other articles. This is the time to try to get this balloon floating for the good of the island. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Karen?
I just wanted to say I agree with everybody else that just trying to work together. I was really struck when everybody got up and stood and did their little spiels to be on the work group. I think almost every person said something about wanting to find a balanced solution. And so my hope is that that's what this is all about, that we're all coming from different places and that we can work together within this process to try to come up with something that works. I've really been, I think it's really important for us to all assume positive intentions from everyone. We may be coming from different perspectives, but I think we all really have good intentions and love the island and want the best overall, even if that doesn't all look in entirety like we want it to look.
Thanks. And Tom?
I agree. I think H and I are completely unseverable from the rest of the protocols. And as we are all appointed by the select board, FinCom, and the planning board, we're not representing them, but we're representing the folks from Nantucket, and we need to do our best for the voters in Nantucket.
Thanks.
So I, Stacy, if I may, I agree with, we need to do our best for the voters. The big concerns that I hear are that, we don't have years, like every year that we wait, this problem sort of, however you define it, the problem becomes harder to solve. And that's a real strong concern, I think, from folks who are looking at us at this work group. The idea that there may be a plan B or a side alternative is, like I said, is not something that we've solidified. But what, I would hope that this work group absolutely would come out with a great outcome. I just don't, I don't know that everyone's got assurance on that. And if it doesn't happen, and yet, to Dave's earlier point, now we still have questions about our zoning. We still have questions about whether year-rounders can even rent. We still have questions. And I think that it's still a concern. So I don't know that we're gonna, I don't know that I can have a final answer right now, but it's good to hear from everybody. But if I can add one more thing, what John said, John Kitchener, about, not representing people, that's not why I'm here. I wouldn't be on this work group if I wasn't representing a good group of folks, right? And same for Kathy. Maybe you would be, Kathy, but I'm just saying we do represent constituents and supporters of, that may have different opinions. And we have a responsibility to a portion of these folks, a portion of folks who we're talking to, in terms of, they're going to be at town meeting. And so I'm not here as, just myself, right?
Yeah, Peter Schaefer.
Julia, I think if you feel that way and you can't segregate yourself from that opinion, I think you have to recuse yourself from the committee. Because you're either on the committee or you're not on the committee. You can't be halfway there. And even though you do represent a constituency, you are an individual who is chosen to represent that constituency. And I think you have to participate with us 100%. Otherwise, I just don't think it works.
Peter Kahn.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what Peter just said. I mean, we all represent, well, most of us represent quote unquote constituencies. We understood going in that we had a commitment to trying to resolve this. If we're all playing, with plan B behind our backs, then we're not going in with the understanding that we all agreed to up front. And if that's the case, it seems to me that anyone who feels that they cannot abide by that should they and their committee, they and their whatever their group is they're representing, should pull out now.
Mary?
I'm sorry, does this have to be decided today? Because I just feel like I didn't even know the meeting was happening until about 10 or 11 o'clock today. I never got a phone call, and this document was sent to us at 10 o'clock today. I worked all day, so I have looked over it, but I mean, is this something that we cannot wait and make a vote on at the next meeting? Because it does feel, okay, I thought we weren't supposed to interrupt.
Sorry.
I just think that it's a little short-sighted to make a big decision on something that not everyone agrees on, especially when we got it at, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock today. Like, I had to send out emails to even get the information about the meeting. So I guess I feel like I'm a little behind the 8 ball here, and it's really a little unfair to make this big decision. I understand I'm not a voter, but I'll be at town meeting, so.
Yeah, and to be clear, my goal is not for us to decide on these protocols tonight. My goal is for us to discuss them and then to make revisions and to bring them, any revisions that are needed, to the next meeting to finalize. So I recognize that these came last minute, and Mary, you were left off the initial communication. And I will take responsibility for that. So yeah, the goal is not to decide on them tonight, but it is to discuss them. David?
Hi, yes, I mean, I think you kind of said it, but this isn't about demonizing any one member. This is about everyone agreeing to work under the same guidelines. And I think if we have some people that can't do that for whatever reasons, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't, but I think that we as a group, we need to stand our ground and all agree to work under these circumstances. And if we can't, or a member can't, then I think that they should step away for the betterment of the group, and their next in line should come forward. But again, this isn't about, it's not a reflection on them as a person or anything. This is about our group and about us making it work. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear about that for 1 second, because I think the idea behind this is not just that it's the individual representative who's not going to do it. It's actually meant to bind the group that has appointed them, right? So I don't think it's enough to say you, David, are not going to put forward an article. It's that the group that you represent is also not going to put forward an article. Right. So just to be clear about that. And then beyond that, I mean, I think unless there's others who want to say, who haven't gotten to weigh in on this, I think it's been said. I think I've heard that, the vast majority of the group would like this to be in the protocols. And then it'll just be up to individual members to decide, and their groups that they represent, to decide can they sign on and live with that. And as we said, that does not need to be declared tonight. But it's more that this is the conversation and this seems to be where it's going. But Julia.
Thank you everyone for sharing on that one. I think, Stacy, is it okay to talk about other points in here?
Absolutely.
So in the public outreach and engagement, I think that, Tom may have referred to this a little bit earlier in the meeting. This format doesn't really lend itself for engagement. Would it make sense to have perhaps an in-person / hybrid, whatever, but, I say in person because a lot of folks on the island are used to in person, even though a lot of folks have, migrated well to the virtual format. There still are a number of older people who are technologically challenged, I would say. I don't know if that's, so we can say that, but they would prefer to show up in person. They feel more comfortable that way. But certainly maybe a public hearing that happens sooner than later to get impressions on how to move forward, and then maybe a public hearing later when things are a little bit more formed that gauges, temperature on possibilities. Yeah. So I just thought, this is a part that's really hard. No one's going to watch. Some people are going to watch these meetings, but this is, even if you put it on double time, it's a 2-hour meeting.
Yeah. So thanks for raising that. So let me just say a little bit of my thoughts around public engagement. So I think having separate public meetings makes a lot of sense. I think there's a couple of, I proposed in my initial work plan, one of them that happens a little later on, where the public would get a chance to review options and evaluate packages. We could do 2 versions, one online and one, because hybrid is tough. I recommend to do one in person and one online. So like the same meeting twice, one for people who can or would prefer to be there in person, and one for those who would prefer or can only be there virtually. And the way that I often the way that we recommend public meetings, it's a little different than a public hearing, where people kind of stand up at the microphone, say their 2 or 3 minutes and sit back down. You know, I think we could do better than that. I think we could provide a format that's really deliberative for people to, you know, work in small groups with each other, to use, you know, sticky boards and put comments up and organize comments and engage with each other. People who have different views can tell each other why, right? Rather than just make statements. And so, as I said, I proposed this in the work plan really a little later, where we're at the stage of options and packages. But initially, I was thinking would be good to have it in 2 places. First, early on, where, you know, people can really weigh in on what is the problem that we're trying to solve and what would solutions look like. And, you know, maybe even do some telling each other of stories of their experiences, and again, trying to both lower the temperature and find areas of commonality. I'm conscious of the tremendous time constraints we are under, to try and get something on the warrant for this year's town meeting, which I've heard everyone really wants to do, and that's our charge. So if we can figure out how to do it twice, you know, let's try to do it twice. But I'm curious what other people's thoughts are about what you think would be helpful regarding public meetings, public, you know, public opportunities for engagement. Kathy.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't able to get the unmute. Just a quick thought. If we're going to do in-person public meetings, I don't have any particular objection to that at all. I love in-person is always better and you can do it. But would it be possible to make sure that the folks who could not be there were able to listen live to the folks that were there in person, so that you wouldn't be missing out on the dialogue that was going on there? I certainly will fly to the island if I can to be in any of these in-person meetings, but I just wanted that thrown out there to see if that was a possibility.
Yeah, that's helpful to name. And you know, I'm open to how we want to try and do these. I think I just have seen that it's tough to do both, have people participating virtually and participating in person simultaneously using really good process. But if people think that's really important, we could try to do that. We could also have the meeting twice, have really good notes from the meeting. We could have, I don't know, Kathy, about how fulfilling it'll feel for people to be just listening in, but can't participate. And then they'll have their own meeting that other, you know, we could try to figure all that out. But I think if the underlying goal is, let's make sure everybody gets a chance to participate in the way that's comfortable to them, and everybody gets as much as possible to learn what was said in the, you know, format they weren't part of or were less able to be
right. Well, if we were
right.
If we were to have both, you know, an in-person and a virtual, but allow the in-person one to be hybrid in the sense that others could choose to listen in, like those of us on the committee here would want to hear what people have to say. Just a thought.
Got it. Peter.
This is a question for Dave more than for everybody else. Is Dave and I were both on the original organization committee that put this group together. And I don't recall, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't recall the pressure that we should get the answer by town meeting this coming year. I mean, obviously, we'd all like to get this done as quickly as possible, but I do not believe that we should sacrifice anything to get this thing done for that town meeting. If it's going to take longer, it's going to take longer, and it'll have to go to the next town meeting or a special town meeting. But I don't think, I don't recall the pressure to get this done by town meeting. Dave, do you?
I don't, but I feel like it was one of those unsaid things. Like in a perfect world, we do want to get this out by town meeting, but I don't think we should put anything half baked out there. And if it takes longer, it takes longer. And I mean, and that is just one more reason why we really need to be careful not to have anyone putting out side deals to destroy our work. So I mean, I feel the pressure, but I think we need to feel the pressure, Peter. I think it's going to cause us to be more productive in a short period of time. If we succumb to that, we'll never get it done. I think that's a bad call for the group. I think that that maybe it was unsaid, but I felt personally, and it might not be true, I kind of felt a pressure that this was going to happen by then. So.
Yeah, and just to say, because this is actually word for word from the framework up here in terms of the objectives of the working group. And one of the objectives is to identify either new bylaws and or zoning that would be voted upon at the 2023 annual town meeting. So that's certainly an objective that was laid out from your framework planning group.
Yeah, agreed. If we can get it done, that would be a perfect situation.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments on public meetings, other pieces of these protocols that you want to discuss? And again, I recognize you may not all have had time to review them all up till now. I can take additional comments via email after the meeting, but I think as much as we can get discussion here of any concerns or suggestions or things that aren't in here that you think should be, that are going to help this group be more productive. David?
I guess this is a question to you, Stacy, and to Megan is do we have the staff to do a hybrid meeting? Do you guys feel comfortable with that?
I've never run one. I think it's more, I'd have to check in with town administration on meeting space availability. I know particularly on Tuesdays for fairgrounds is taken by HDC. I'm not sure what may or may not be available that offers the technology to allow for hybrid meetings.
And it's a far more staff intensive process than just a regular Zoom meeting, correct?
From my understanding, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that probably needs to go into our thought process.
Yeah, and to say, right, Semanish and I have been doing some hybrid meetings over the last year or so, and they're just harder. I mean, even with all the right technology, I think especially when the issues are difficult, the relationships among the participants are not well established and trust is not high. And especially if, it's a few people, the same few people who are virtual while everybody else is in person on an ongoing basis. It makes it tough.
And if the technology isn't up to par and people stutter or they can't get on, and I agree, like in person is the gold standard, but if it's not possible, it's not possible. So I just wanted to throw out the staffing issue out there, and I'm not opposed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you will notice that I did put on here, like, I would love it if we could at least try for one longer in-person meeting. And I think sometime, if we aimed for sometime in December, when hopefully by then we've reviewed the data we need, we've started to develop options, and we're at the stage where we're really trying to just evaluate pros and cons and things like that. Again, we could, we could still make the meeting accessible if we had the technology to viewers remotely, that's a lot less challenging, I think, than trying to have equal participation for remote and in-person participants. Jim?
I was just going to address exactly that issue, that I would really like to see us have at least one meeting that is in person. I realize it's difficult for people that aren't living on the island. I'm in San Francisco right now visiting a daughter who has some health issues, and I realize that I'll be back and forth. But I think it's really important. There's a lot of communication that happens in person, that you can get a sense of someone's goodwill in person, maybe, that you can't virtually. Just that sort of issue of bonding, of expecting the best of each other, of respecting each other. Even a good handshake can communicate respect in a way that some things on screen cannot. So I think it's very important that we have at least one meeting in person. Thank you.
Thanks. Kathy? You're muted. Kathy, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, not going back to the in-person thing, and whatever the group decides, we'll work around that. But I guess going back to the data expectation too. So a lot of what we're doing going forward is under the expectation we can get done in January, when the data that's going to be collected by the new regulations, which is Nantucket specific data, won't be available until after the first of the year, I'm guessing at the earliest. So my question is, do we even have the data that we'll decide that we need? And we don't know that yet. So that's going to be another challenge to getting done by the end of January. Love to be done that, but it's just something else, like, what do we have? What's there?
Yeah.
That's my question.
Well, so turning to data next, but I just want to make sure if there's any last comments on the protocols. And again, you can feel free to send me your email thoughts. I can make any, just like is sort of my role in between meetings, right? You all send me your thoughts. I will make revisions or suggestions or note outstanding issues to bring back for the next meeting. And, maybe make some recommendations around. I think it would be helpful. We'll do a little poll to see how many people could come. Those who are not on the island could come together for an in-person, and when would be best for you. And let's see if we can pull that together before our next meeting. But Jim, your hand is still up. Was that from before? Okay. John?
Yeah, just a quickie. Regarding, an on-island meeting in December, I'm here, but we should just remember that boats in December are liable to cancellation. So we could spend a lot of time organizing something that we find out 5 days beforehand is not going to happen because there's no boats. I mean, we didn't have 3 boats last week, and it's only October. So just a thought how much time do you want to put into that?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Julia.
Just had a quick question about the timeline in terms of the meeting schedule. So it looks like we have meeting 8 on January 17th, which that's a meeting exclusively for the group. I'm trying to understand, when does the select board, who is missing from this group and has to endorse or sponsor whatever article and could have comments, obviously, they're supposed to ratify or adopt the warrant on the 18th.
Oh,
so that might be a little late. Maybe this is just draft and things can move around, but that's probably getting into too late. Is
good to know. And yes, I did not have those dates. So I just put this as every other week.
Okay.
But Megan, do you want to weigh in on that?
I just wanted to make mention that any zoning specific article also will require a hearing of the planning board before it goes to the select board and the finance committee. Advertisement for that needs to occur 2 weeks before the hearing occurs. So there is some statutory regulated timeline things involved beyond just the select board adoption of any zoning warrant articles.
Yeah, so Megan, maybe you and the CBI team can talk a little more about what that really means for the timeline, and we can come back with some refinement. But I think what we are suggesting here, at least for now, is an every other week meeting. I will just say more often than that, in my experience, just is not, we don't have enough time to even turn stuff around. So I would say that every other week is about as rapid as we could possibly do. But we were just going to stick with Tuesday nights. We're going to shift to 3 hours because we know 4 hours is insane. And I'm sorry I did it to you all for tonight. But as you see, we're already running behind. So I just had so much we wanted to do. But so hopefully people can live with at least this schedule for meeting 2 for next week, for 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, the 25th from 5 to 8. And then we will we'll revisit the schedule from there. Okay, with that, I would like to turn to information needs. So let me go back to my slides here for a moment. So I just want to quickly share with you all how we think about information and data, because we live in the post-fact universe where people, if we cannot share the same data and facts, like they have no use to us in this context, right? Because we are here to try and collaborate to build consensus. So everybody needs to be able to have a set of data or facts or information that we all can work from. So we really think about information needs in collaborative processes like this. We have a term that we call joint fact finding. And that is to really make sure that instead of having dueling statistics, right? We do not want to be in a universe where one group brings together one set of facts and another brings another, and we just argue about which are true. Instead, we want to see how can we figure out one set of facts that everybody agrees meet these 3 criteria. The first is that they have to be relevant. That is, we have to be able to clearly say, how is this information going to help us make our decisions about the issues in front of us, right? If it's not going to change anyone's mind, if it's not the decision relevant, then let's not bother. Second, it needs to be accurate and legitimate. That is, it actually has to reflect reality. So if it's so partial that, we don't know really what it tells us, right? It's not going to be that useful, right? So surveys, maybe we all can have enough faith that surveys are sufficiently accurate and legitimate reflections of whatever it is we want to know. Maybe not, right? We got to figure that out, because before we go ahead and do it, because we really just want to make sure that whatever it is we're working with is actually reflecting reality. The third is that it needs to be both publicly and politically credible. That is, you all have to, it can't be skewed. It can't feel like it's coming from a source that some people just don't accept, right? So that's really sort of our baseline here. So given that, I now want to open back up to discussion. What is the data that you think we need that we can get, right? Like, let's just be clear, that we can get in the time frame that we have. To Kathy's point, there may be data we'd really like that just isn't available to us. So what is the data that we actually do think that we can get And I'd like to know what question or questions that data is going to help us resolve, and where or from whom can we get the data. And let's, make sure we understand that people feel that that's acceptable. We can come back to the question of definitions after that. So let's just start first with information and data. So I'm going to do this so I can look at all of you. Peter Kahn.
Okay, I guess with all due respect, I guess I would have started to try to first defining the problem, then figure out what data we need. But given that we're not doing that, let me simply say that to the extent that people are saying that the STRs it's a problem because we've got increased noise, we've got increased parking issues, we've got those types of things, and it seems to me one of the things we want to know is to what degree STRs are contributing to that problem. And so for one thing we would like to know is we have the biggest congestion in the July and August period. All right, what percentage of the people on island are staying in STRs in July and August? I believe we should be able to have that data should be available to us. The issue of that STRs are diminishing affordable housing. To me, I guess right now I don't see the connection directly, and I'd like to see some data that establishes that, and that would be helpful. I think another issue I think would be, I'm sorry, here I have my looking at my notes here for 1 second. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I guess for example, another thing that we could look at is there's a concern about parties and events. You have to have. I know on island you have to have tent permitting. How many permits are being pulled for parties? Is this? I'm trying to establish the extent to which this is a problem that there's too much noise and that the SDRs are causing them. So that's where I'm coming from here.
All right, thank you, Peter. So a whole slew of questions to try and figure out, right? I do think this is, to what extent, to what degree are STRs contributing to this set of quality of life concerns that you all have named as potentially a problem, and whatever data we might find that might relate to that might include percentage of people who are in STRs, what kind of party information you might have, you said, and then maybe it'll be helpful, actually. I know you all have a lot to contribute, but let me just put this up because I did ask this question to you all before we started. So let me just put this as some of our starting points of some of the things I heard, and then we'll take more. So I did hear people wanted to understand zoning. This is more of a baseline, make sure everybody understands what's possible in zoning. We had basic questions around how many STRs do we have? How have they changed? How quickly have they changed? What amount of conversions, if we can find out information about conversions from year-round rental to STR. There were some questions in there about cars. Percentage questions might be good there too. Stats on ownership. So who owns the STRs? How many people own STR? How many do people own? There were a percentage of tourism rooms. I guess that gets to Peter's question there. Then there were a whole set of questions about costs and how those have changed, price points and alternative uses, revenue impacts, noise and nuisance complaints. We could add the party things, model approaches from similar communities, and then legal sideboards. We've heard from a number of people of what's illegal, what can't we do, and what can we do. So let me, I just wanted to put that as sort of starting points and then coming back to our hands here. So Peter Schaefer.
Okay, I think that the questions that there is data that we requested so far has been pretty micro. I think we need some more macro data, like how many people over the past 10 years have been coming onto the island in maybe May, June, July, August, September, counting both the boats, the planes, and the ferry. And take a look at that and see, do we really have a lot more people, or is it a lot more vehicles? You know, I don't think we know. I don't think a lot of the stuff that we'd like to have is probably available. I mean, somebody has a party and the people that rent a tent are a minuscule amount of the people that have a party. So that part, but perhaps we can get through the police department, how many complaints they've had over the past 10 years for parties, something like that. And it also would be interesting to see how many cops we had each year, because I think that the amount of people that are staying probably is going up much more than our infrastructure is rising to the same level. How many people in the health department can check this stuff out? Whatever beyond that. But I do think we need some bigger numbers before we start going down and looking at the specifics.
Great, thanks. John?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this is a Nantucket issue, but there are a lot of other seasonal communities that have taken this, this problem on, and I guess defined it. So I think it would be very good to get sort of a toolbox of policies that other communities have used, and with information on kind of what worked for them and what didn't work for them. And there's probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 10 communities that would be very happy to share with us what their experiences have been and what worked and what didn't. I'm not sure who could get that for us. I have an idea or two, but I do think it would be good sooner rather than later to understand what other communities, how they face this issue and what worked for them and what didn't.
Thanks. Yeah, David.
Yeah, hi. I think we need to know who, what, where, when, and how much, basically. Who owns these properties, where are they located, how often they're rented. As far as some of the other information, I think there's information on police calls. There's information, about parties, and not everyone calls and complains, so that's a tough one. But the town did look through, and so that data does exist somewhere. But I think more importantly, we need to understand the ownership and how that plays into the STR pool, and in what neighborhoods have higher percentages. A lot of that information kind of exists now, but I think that we will get a much more robust version of it soon enough. So I think that those are the big ones that we need to understand: who owns them, how often they're rented, where they exist, and then go from there.
Thanks. Kathy.
Okay, so a couple things. I mean, a lot of them have been covered so far, but let me just go on my list here. So I think the demographics of the island, as far as growth, is important to know the growth over time, so that we can use that as a background for what may be associated with short-term rentals. I think the whole demographics of how the short-term rentals are operated, because what I've learned is amazing differences in how people operate their STRs, when they have them, how long they have people there, why they do it that way. I'd like to know things like how many people are involved in that are year-round people and are involved in the industries and the businesses that support the short-term rental, whose income is dependent on those. I'd like to know if there's been a lot of talk about there's this sharp increase and there's growth, and I think that's absolutely true in the rest of the country that did not have a century-long history of short-term rentals. So the question is, has it really grown? maybe it has, maybe they've moved around on the island. So I don't know if we'll be able to get that data either, but that affects neighborhoods. Perhaps in some neighborhoods, they're growing, and other neighborhoods, they're going away. So that also goes back to zoning. That kind of information would be interested. And just some, estimates of somehow that somebody could come up with, and I don't know if this is data or it'd have to be estimates, but what's the spend of the folks that come into the short-term rentals? What's the percentage of the tourists that come here? Where do they stay? Do they stay in the hotels or the short-term rentals? So we can really better understand the impact if we were to go pull this string out or change this, what would happen over here? Because we don't want to do anything bad. We don't want to, if there's things bad, we could make it worse or that kind of thing. So I think we need to know about fractional and timeshare ownership. Is that something that's here on the island? Is it growing? Is it permitted? Is that something we want or don't want? And then some sort of, lots of people have been here in the last year or two. Well, is that COVID related? Is it short-term rental related? If a way to separate that out would be really helpful. So those are just a few off the top of the head. I've got a whole list, and I can email them to the CBI folks, and rather than taking everyone's time here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I know we don't always know where, you don't always know where to find the information you're saying you want, but to the extent anybody has ideas of where we get that information beyond the the sources of the town that may have those, it'd be good to hear that. Karen?
Yeah.
Some of this, but it seemed like some of the themes that I was similar to the things that I had come up with, which are saying more about STRs, is it possible to be ones that are owned by more investors? Possible to distinguish 27 occupancy versus, can we
I don't
kind
know
of
if
parse
it's me or others. Is Karen breaking up?
Yeah.
Yeah, Karen, maybe turn off your video and try again.
Okay. Does that?
No, you're kind of, we're hearing every third or fourth word, I think.
Move and see if I can get.
Okay, let me come back to you. Tom.
Yeah, I was just thinking the one thing I think would be very advantageous for the work group to consider would be the regulations that recently passed the select board, which I think, if I remember correctly, was Article 39, the Board of Health regulations. I think it would be advantageous for us to entertain, I don't know if we want to get into guests or a letter or testimony or whatever from a member of town staff, maybe Roberto, the health director, something like that, on what they think coming out of the regulations will be the impact. Because I think coming out of our previous discussion about where we'd like to see it a couple of years down the road, some of those points about the things that we'd all like to solve may or may not be solved already, or largely solved or partly solved by those regulations. And so I'd like to hear from a member of town staff on that, or whoever the work group thinks would be best to speak on that.
Thanks, Tom. Jim?
I think Karen was trying to get to this point, but we couldn't hear her. But I too am concerned about, is it possible to get statistics on the numbers or percentage of what we might call corporate rentership, or rental units that have no natural person attached to them, but rather a business entity? I think that's important. And of course, I think we all want to know what is the, if possible, what is the number of STRs over the last, say, 5 years? How has it been increasing or not? I know that because we were doing short-term rentals as of 5 years ago, we did have to register with the state at that point, although not locally with Nantucket, but so those stats should be out there. I'm sure the state has them, so I think they could be gotten that way. And I just want to go back to what someone said about checking out regulations at other communities, maybe similar, maybe not. You can often go to their website, and I'm hoping we'll start to share some. I did, as I mentioned, I got the regulations from Palm Springs, California, and also from South Portland, Maine, 2 different areas. Somewhat different concerns, but both of them start with preambles about the importance of communities being kept intact, being balanced with the rights of property owners to rent. And then they both say that basically short-term rentals are not permitted except by what we will now say is permitted. And they have very interesting answers to a number of these legal issues that we've been wondering about, quite rightly wondering about, and which I'm sure we'll have to define. But for instance, Palm Springs has a particular definition of what a business entity is. I don't know if it would hold up in Massachusetts, but that sort of thing, I really do think we can benefit some by looking at other communities, even though we have to do the work ourselves.
Thanks, Jim. Mary.
So I think that some of this information, well, all of it is, I think, pretty publicly available. If you just go on the GIS and start doing a little dive, you can figure out who owns, if it's a person or not a person. But also, the health department had hired Granicus, I think, to start looking at this information with Article 39. So they have to start, people have to start registering in January, but I think I'm not sure if they've already started collecting this or not. So some of this, I think a lot of this information we want to know is probably out there and just would take some time to dig it up.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mary. Peter Schaefer.
Just, would it make sense to just make a group of 4 people or something to go through all the selection, all these ideas about data and put our heads together, people that know what possibly would be available or not available, and narrow it down to our list? Because we're not, we can have 100 things that we want. We're not going to get 100 things. What do we need, and what do we really need, and what's going to really affect our decision? Probably needs to be discussed first by a smaller group and then by everybody. Just an idea, that's all.
Yeah, let's hold that thought. Julia.
Thank you. I guess I'll start with a list of, a lot of people mentioned some of these things, but I think it was Jim who mentioned, like, going back and looking over time is really helpful. It is sort of paints a picture. And so, yeah, STRs, how the STR industry has evolved in the last 10 years. Okay, so how many are primary residences versus not. The frequency and the length of stay, which is also, I think, just the way things have evolved. The length of stay has, in my opinion, shortened. And I think when people talk about ownership, especially when you're thinking about zoning, but just in general, it's sort of problematic in a way, because it really doesn't tell you anything about how the property is used. So, for example, there may be a corporate home owned, maybe a corporation owns like 25 homes on the island, but they're all year-round rentals, right? So we may all agree that corporate owned homes are not okay. But let's say you could have 3 individuals who own a home and who are just investors, right? And so I'm assuming in that case, you'd probably have an LLC. But I guess, the way that we've been thinking about it is more use. So sort of like goes back to the, frequency, length of stay, sort of the intensity of rental. And I think Granicus should actually be in a good position to look at that. because they do just data scrape, right? And maybe they can't do it on the realtor sites because that information is not publicized the same way, but on the platforms, they may very well be able to do it. Another great source of information I think that the realtors use and that we've used in the past is called AirDNA. It's another, and Granicus might say, we can do everything AirDNA can do, great. But they have historical information on STRs. And of course, I think when it comes to data, even though we may agree that it's good data, there may still be limitations to the data, right? Like the AirDNA data might only be for the platforms and not for the realtors. Well, there are some issues like that when you look at data, I guess. One of the other things that I wanted to add to the list was, we look at the revenues to the town and what about the costs? So we mentioned, somebody mentioned police, like infrastructure, certainly Board of Health or things like that, sewer, water. Kathy mentioned the implications for businesses, and it would be great to understand again, like the costs, because, I think that you can relate a lot of positive, you could say businesses are up overall, we've been booming, the economy's been, we can't even keep up with the demand, but in reality, I don't know that all businesses are doing as well as maybe they did 10 years ago. And I'm not trying to attribute all of this to STRs, but what I'm saying is, there are a lot of folks who are subsidizing their employees' housing. Well, okay, so can we relate it back to, has the growth in STRs contributed to that, sort of lack of year-round housing? I personally don't use the term affordable housing because I think it's year-round. I think affordable is sort of like deed restricted stuff, and that's very specific. And a big question is how, when I talk to folks who rent year-round, this is anecdotal, but I would love to know the data behind, how have STRs increased year-round rents over time? And then I would just add quickly on the data side, how to actually get some of this data. Meredith mentioned the GIS. Yeah, the state's registry, the town has access to the full thing. We don't really have, public doesn't have that anymore. Assessor data, GIS, there's a lot of great information in there. Data Platform did some work in 2019 for the Affordable Housing Trust. It was a housing study. They were the first ones to calculate the number of STRs on Nantucket. They could be a source. They certainly have the population numbers that Peter Schaefer mentioned, were not available. They're a pretty credible source. And then the last one I would say is on the housing side, Judy Barrett's group has been pretty involved with the housing group and the Affordable Housing Trust, the Housing Production Plan, and maybe that's a place to look for some help there.
Great, thanks so much. Karen, let's try again.
Hi again, sorry about that. So coincidentally, I'm actually in a short-term rental in North Carolina with my husband's family right now for a week. So anyway, so I think it's a lot of what I was saying was covered, just trying to parse out what's possible to know about ownership in terms of, both family, a lot of families, I want to be clear, a lot of families have LLCs because it's a liability thing. It's not an investment property corporation type thing. It's for liability and tax purposes and so forth. So just to say it's an LLC doesn't mean that it's not a family. In fact, I think almost all the houses on our neighborhood are LLCs. And as I said before, most of them are not STRs. But what can we understand about and what's possible to distinguish between, who owns what? And then I agree with what are they used for? It sounds like how many of these are being used almost as venues versus for events versus for a family to have a vacation, that kind of thing. I was wondering about a deep dive. We've talked about just the noise or the complaint data, looking, I saw some data for a year or so, but can we look at 5 years and can we, try to parse that apart as best we can, if it's possible, I don't know, to see, was it just like a garden variety, somebody playing their music too loud, or was it a big party that caused the complaint. Is it possible? Is any of that data available? I don't know. And then along with the idea of learning more about zoning, I was wondering more about, are there other things that don't technically fall under zoning that could be part of a package that we do? And are there any of those tools that we might also want to be gathering data on as we go through this process? So.
Great. Thanks, Karen. John.
I just wanted to piggyback what Julia was saying about community data platform, because they these days do a lot of work for other communities. They started off on the island, but these days they do a lot of work for other communities. And when I was talking about the policies that and what's worked and not for other communities, they would be, I think, a really good, credible source for that kind of information. And I know Jim's doing some stuff, but we need to get a good data set, and I think that they would be very useful to do that.
Yeah, great. So I guess I wanted Megan, sorry if you don't mind me putting on you on the spot here. From what you have heard, and given what the town might have, what Granicus might be able to help us with, and relying on others like Community Data Platform and others, do you feel like there's enough to be able to spend the next 2 weeks collecting stuff and bring people to present answers to the questions we have heard so far? Or do you think it would be helpful to bring a small group together to work on it from this committee? And then, of course, that means we'd have to host those, those open meetings. Do you think it would be more helpful to bring people together to work on this further with you and others?
So I can tell you, I personally don't have time as a staff member to dedicate hours and hours of data mining. I can certainly point you all in the right direction on where to find some of these materials, and leave it to you if you think you may need to break out into subgroups that would be subject to open meeting. I know in terms of specifically, as an example, the noise complaints, when we did the research for that last year, planning staff did kind of in preparation of some zoning articles that were brought forward. It was compiling hundreds and hundreds of pages of police reports, cross-referencing those police reports with what the state has as inventory of the short-term rentals, and just manually going through and trying to figure out what were valid, what were not valid, what was long-term rentals, what was home ownership, are they on that list? So to do 1 year took quite a bit of time, just as an example. For the data platform, I think, they're a great resource, but you're going to have to consider what type of funding you may need to request the select board to get you some of those answers. I don't know if it may be worthwhile to reach out to individual real estate offices to see if they'd be willing to share some of their historical information of their rental inventory lists. I'm not sure if those are private or not from before the state started collecting data, just as a suggestion.
Yeah, Julia. Sorry, was there something you wanted?
So sorry, if there's the desire to take this offline because we're running out of time a little bit, I'd be happy to be part of that group. I mean, I think there's some things we can do that are pretty quick, that are, that your team, Megan, has already either partway done, or you're, like the registry with the GIS and the assessor data. That is like a little gold mine in itself. And I think even though you may not be able to share the detail, you can share summaries and information that would be helpful to this group in answering some of these questions. That's one example. And there are others, I think, that are pretty short money that are very quickly accessible, like the Air DNA, if Granicus can't do it.
Yeah, Kathy?
There we go. So yeah, we'd be like to help if we can be provided data to do some data mining. We have folks that would be willing to help with that kind of thing. I think that some of the sources that I've been frustrated with the state resource, the state registration database, because it's basically an ad-only database. It doesn't cost anything to register. So once you register, you're in there forever. There's no reason to take your name off if you stop renting or you sell your house. I know if I sell my house and somebody buys it and then they want to register it as a short-term rental, it'll be in there twice. So it's very hard to know unless you have some more specific data than the public has. Maybe the town has more specific data they can look at. I know on my street, there's more houses listed and more STRs than there are houses. And I know who runs them. So it's hard to go with that data to look for growth. So that's the hard part, is once you get in there, then you're like, wow, is this really even, it's a credible source, but I think we need the data from registrations on Nantucket to see what the real numbers are. I think and unfortunately we won't have it. So that's the frustrating part for me.
Yeah, so I think given time, I think it would be great to get a couple of volunteers. We'll put a time on the agenda. It'll, since we need 2 full days, we'll need to, aim to maybe have a meeting early next week, and see if we can get the representative from Granicus, get the planning department, get the health department, and, whatever set of working group members here want to join, and see if we can figure out what we can pull together quickly. So I heard Julia say you'd be game to help with that. If others are interested, can you put your hand raise on right now, just so we sort of see who would want to be part of that? And it would mean probably trying to set up a meeting, early next week. So we got lots of volunteers. We'll take note of this. Thank you. Okay. Excellent. So we'll be in touch with you to try and get something set up for that. All right. I would like to turn now to public comment. So let me share this. For our members of the public, we ask you to identify yourself. I think name and address is that a standard? You ask people to say name and address at public meetings? Anyway, that's
just name usually.
Just name. Okay, name is good then. We do ask that you please speak to topics only that were discussed on tonight's agenda. So that is speaking about the problem we're here to solve, the vision of success, the operating protocols and information needs, and limit your comment. I think we'll see how many people want to speak, and I'll be able to see from hands up, but we'll aim for somewhere between 1 minute and 3 minutes. You also can type your questions into the Q&A. We'll see if there's relevant questions that we can seek responses to, that we will add to the meeting summary. So before I do that, Peter Kahn, was there something else you wanted, or your hand was just a new term called legacy hand? Okay.
Right.
Thanks. Okay. So with that, it looks like we don't have that many hands up. So we will we'll start here with Grant. And why don't we give you a full 3 minutes here if you are interested. So go ahead, Grant.
Wow, a full 3 minutes. That's unusual. So just a few comments. I've watched the whole meeting, and the first one is about fairness and equity. I agree with Jim and a few others that said that equity is more important than equality or being treated the same way. My wife is a former kindergarten teacher, and she used to say that fairness is not when everybody gets the same thing. Fairness is when everyone gets what they need. And, you know, we have a community that is housing cost distressed. 52% of homeowners are housing cost distressed. A note about,
You can wait.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, whoever was speaking will please mute yourselves while Grant is speaking. Thank you.
A note about public involvement. I mean, there's a lot for this group to do, and to spend time going out of your way to get public involvement means that you're going to get a lot of interested parties to pack meetings. I would recommend that you do your best to make sure that that public involvement is representative of the community and not just the vocal people who care about their own personal well-being. A note about keeping members of this group to keeping them from bringing forth other town meeting warrant articles. I would caution you to check with town council and make sure that that is not a violation of First Amendment. It sounds like it is to me, to keep people from being able to go and have their issues heard at town meetings. Sounds like we're getting into a little bit of a gray area there. And then lastly, I hope that the solution that you come up with is not one big omnibus article at town meeting. I hope that it is chunked up. If you only address the year-round residents' right to short-term rentals, and you only address some kind of protection against investors and corporate businesses that are trying to run STRs at a profit, you will have done 90% of the work that most people want you to do. So that's my 3 minutes right there.
Great, thank you so much. And just a quick answer to your First Amendment point, which I'm happy for town council to weigh in, but this is a voluntary a committee, and so it's a voluntary set of guidelines that people would be putting on themselves, right? Not nobody's muzzling anyone's right. It's only a set of agreements that the committee makes to each other. So no one would be able to take them to court for breaking it. It would just be a violation of the group's norms and the group's trust. Turning to Rick, we are now allowing you to speak.
Mute. Stacy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great. I got two screens and clicked a couple of times and hope that I got through.
Yes.
You know, I have any number of comments I'd like to make, but I think what would be, in my mind, most helpful was to remind all the members as to what happened at the last town meeting. And at that meeting, Article 42 came forward, and apparently the planning board decided it wasn't likely to pass, and they decided to work with other people to refer it to a committee. And I think they worked through a number of committees and ended up with all the committees that voted 100% in favor of Article 42 to be part of the process which developed your committee. And my concern is, quite frankly, that concern of a number of voters may not flow through this committee's process and come out in your recommendations. So I'm trying to be quite frank. Town meeting has its own mind. And if your solution doesn't work to accommodate concerns of many residents, it's likely to have the same result as happened at the last town meeting. And just to be quite frank, many of the people I talked to feel your committee had a certain bias towards people who supported Article 2. And therefore, I'm concerned that the outcome may not be productive. So I'm just trying to be quite frank in my comments to you. And I wish the committee good luck. This is a very difficult process and nothing is easy for you. So good luck to all of you.
Great, thank you, Rick. Grant responded, thank you as well to all of you for giving your time to this work group. Are there any other of our attendees who would like to make a comment or ask questions? Okay. Oh, Grant, you had more to say? Grant, did you want to say something else?
I apologize. I've been listening to everyone speaking, and I know everyone is meeting in good faith and that they are doing this as a member of this community. And I would hope that people would be, instead of looking for data that supports their existing position, I would hope that people would just look at all the data. And look at all the data as a third party would, and then come to a conclusion. Because if we all stick to our intransigent positions, this work group's not going to get anything done, and I hope it does.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. And I do think that is why we want people who are thinking about this from all different perspectives to together identify what the data needs are and the data that gets us there. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to turn back to our committee. And I want to put up my thoughts about next steps. So as I mentioned, I want to propose bi-weekly meetings on Tuesday from 5 to 8. Our next meeting would be Tuesday, October 25th. We will try to get a work group, a subgroup of the work group together next week to talk about data needs and sources to collect that data, hopefully to be able to bring data to our October 25th meeting. Should we decide we need more time to get data to make that time productive, we will reach out and let you know. So this date may be slightly subject to change, just so that we really make sure that we've got things to bring forward for all of you when we come back together. I will also be bringing a final version of or a revised version, I should say, of the operating protocols. So please do send me any comments or suggestions that you have beyond those things that we've talked about. And so I will bring those to try to get some next steps on those operating protocols and hopefully get those adopted formally by the group. And I will also work on the problem definition based on what we heard. I think, you know, I know people have said we haven't talked about what the problem is. I do actually see a lot of connection between the things people said they wanted as success. Just to go back to those for a minute, and the problem, right? With the sense that I don't know how much agreement we're going to get from people about whether and how much these things are contributing to, how much STRs are contributing to these problems, right? I think the data is meant to help answer that question. That is what we're going to try and resolve. But my understanding is that the problem is incorporated in all of this, all of these points about defining success, but I will try and frame it into a problem statement that I will run past you all, get your input, and try to bring to the next meeting as well. So that's what I have. Anyone have any other comments, questions, concerns, points you want to raise before we close? Peter.
Stacy, it would be helpful, I think, if you could share your slides with us.
Yes,
and
will do.
send us a set of. Thank you.
Yeah, so the slide, I will share the slides with you and with the public. We will share the draft protocol. We will make sure those get posted. I think Megan and Adrian, you're going to help make sure those get posted onto the website so the public will be able to see them as well. Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Well, we'll also have the recording of the meeting and the link to that. We will be working on pulling together a summary. We will get that out to you all in draft sometime next week. And the typical way we operate is we send you the summary in draft. You will send us any comments or corrections. We'll compile those, make any changes, and bring the and send you the revised version prior to our meeting, hopefully to adopt or approve at the meeting and then post. So thank you, John, for your comment. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in this long meeting. I don't know if we accomplished things or I just managed to wear you all out. But in any case, thank you for sticking with it, and onward. Have a good rest of your evening and week.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.